John Kastelein and Juan Badimon discuss whether imaging studies can substitute for endpoint clinical trials. Both experts agree that imaging studies are not ready to replace hard endpoint clinical trials. But does the discussion end there? Not really, especially when clinical drug development programs are taken into account.
If you have a drug that in early studies has demonstrated that lowers the LDL and increases the HDL, theoretically, for what we know, this drug should be associated with an inhibition of the progression of the plaque or even a regression of the plaque that you already have. And this is where what we can call it the proof of concept studies are going to be wonderful. And then, because if you have a drug that does not affect significantly the plaque, maybe you have to think twice before involving in some multi-million, multi-patient, multi-site.
In the old days, you could say, this drug lowers cholesterol, this drug lowers blood pressure, so therefore we're gonna do it in 10,000 patients. But now, for example, we have inflammation as an important part, as Professor Badimon showed in his talk. Inflammation, atherosclerosis is a chronic inflammatory disorder. So suppose you come up with an anti-inflammatory drug. What is your surrogate marker there? What is it? Sedimentation rate, CRP? That's not really enough for $750 million to move forward. So you want to have some indication that the arterial wall, wherever it is showing some sign of benefit. And that's why imaging studies are so important in drug development. But again, echoing Professor Badimon's word, we have not found the ideal imaging or the ideal combination of imagings yet.
For John Kastelein, imaging is going to be the big winner in risk stratification for treatment initiation. Christie Ballantyne shares his thoughts.
This is the dream, that we could actually have better, with molecular imaging, that we could in fact, not just for a population, but for an individual, determine the optimal therapy and also the response to therapy. And I think that we may be there, but it may take 5 or 10 years. That with blood tests, genetic tests, I think we'll have a tremendous advance of the concept of global risk and then how to stop that risk.
So it's really interesting listening to this debate, but I have to say that I've been impressed lately with the fact that several examples of congruence between imaging studies and outcomes. For instance, reversal, congruence between the IMT studies, the IVUS coronary studies, and outcome. Similarly, in Periscope, with pioglitazone, benefit demonstrated in Chicago, benefit demonstrated in IVUS, and for all intents and purposes, benefit in patients. So it seems like a pretty good tool, imaging studies, at least to start out with. It'll never replace clinical trials, but it gives us an indication of where we could be headed. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the regulatory environment now is going to be moving towards a more conservative perspective. And we need to adopt the idea that imaging biomarkers will be very useful for the proof of concept, as we heard from Juan Badimon. And it will be sort of an internal guide for us to move forward towards an endpoint trial, because I think that the regulators are going to be demanding endpoints. In 2007, in the cardiovascular metabolic arena, the US FDA recognized hemoglobin A1C, systolic blood pressure, and LDL cholesterol as surrogate endpoints, that is, biomarkers that were sufficient to allow registration of a drug. And today, in 2008 and going forward, each of those biomarkers has come under challenge with respect to the correlation with clinical events. So I think that the route for development of drugs and evaluation of therapies is going to involve imaging, but never the registration of drugs for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I can name one circumstance where I think imaging, could it be developed to do this, if you could image hot plaques very safely and very cheaply, where we apply mass guideline-driven prevention, it still might be possible, because people break through. If we could identify who are the people who have active hot plaques with a $100 or $50 imaging test, that I think could be something that could be interesting in the future.
Well, Dick, I think that your dream of having a low-cost imaging modality is a bit far away. And even if there were not an issue of cost, we have issues of radiation and of the potential toxicities of the agents, such as gadolinium or contrast, which can induce nephropathy. So there's even another basket of challenges to imaging modalities for screening individuals of unknown risk. And that is what I've called the incidentaloma problem. That is identifying a lesion that's not related to what you're looking for, that then requires diagnostic and sometimes even therapeutic workup. So I think we have to be very careful about how we screen populations of unknown risk with imaging modalities.
I think if we had a pile of money here on the table, and I think we would both opt for spending it for blood tests or biomarkers that are more specific than outcome than we currently have, rather than developing another imaging agent or radiating, emitting test as you suggested.
But I think that the imaging modalities will provide useful way stations both towards the evaluation of novel therapeutics and perhaps towards gauging individual risk in the future.
I agree with that.